Dear siblings, my friends in faith, my speech title is Hungarian Unitarians meets American Unitarians Universalists. Relationship between Hungarian Unitarians and American Unitarians started from the 16th century. Dear siblings, I feel it a privilege, and I am happy to be here again after 4 years, January 2018, when I preached and held lectures 2 times with my wife, Eva, and here was our daughters, Bogi, too. Eva is here in Honolulu, too, but she has another event, a fundraising one for the Hungarian School of Honolulu, but she sent her greetings to all of you. Relationships and friendships are very important in a human life, and there is a Hungarian proverb that says that it is in difficulty that we learn who is the true friend. As you all know, Ukraine, neighboring Hungary and Romania, where I come from, has been a brutal war for almost a year now. Most of the world immediately rushed to Ukraine's aid and took it millions of refugees. Ukrainians left behind in their homeland are being helped by some with weapons, others with food and the necessities of daily life. All denominations, including the Hungarian Unitarian Church, send monthly aid to the war zone, and the Unitarian College, in which is the Hungarian headquarters, where I am working as well too, has housed Ukrainian refugees in its dormitory. It is well known that there is a large Hungarian and Romanian minorities living in Transcarpathian Ukraine. That is their homeland. Unfortunately, even before the war, Ukrainian's government did not allow respect, or did not always respect their minorities and the language rights, etc. But with the outbreak of war, Romania and Hungary, not to mention other countries, immediately extended a hand of friendship to their brothers and sisters in disasters. For the Ukrainians, it proved that their neighbors did not turn their back in difficulty and were indeed true friends, helped them to survive this cruel war. Similar things happened after the First World War. Only the actors were different. Then, after the Treaty of Trianon in Paris in 1920, Hungary lost 2/3 of its territory, and many Hungarians were become a minorities overnight. With the annexation of Transylvania to Romania, the largest Hungarian minority was established there. In the occupied territories, the Romanian authorities declared a state of siege, along with censorship, physical punishment, beatings, and so on. Political and civil organization ceased to exist. Freedom of assembly and even of travel was suspended. Imprisonments, internments, and death sentence in military courts followed. The Hungarian population did not feel safe in many, and so many emigrated from Transylvania. By 1923, exactly 100 years ago, the center of refugees in Budapest account 200,000 refugees from Transylvania. The Unitarians who remained in Transylvania were helped by the American Unitarians. And in 1923, exactly 100 years ago, the sisters or partner church relationships was established. An American Unitarian congregation accepted the Transylvanian Unitarian congregation as a partner and supported it financially and morally so that the congregations could remain alive even after the war. The time has come from me to briefly speak about the connection between the Hungarian and the American Unitarians. This time, I will tell you something of the most bizarre event happened in the town of Kolozsvár, Transylvania, during the 16th century. It is common knowledge that Unitarianism was born in Kolozsvár, Transylvania, Romania, but few people know that this time received a very unusual guest in 1574, an Indian. Yes, an American Indian. But before anybody call me a crazy man, I will add that the above-mentioned Indian is one of the main figures of the colloquy entitled Catechesis Christiana. He was born and lived his life in a literary theological work which appeared in 1574 in Kolozsvár. Its author was Jacobus Paleologus, the boldest ideologist of anti-Trinitarianism in the 16th century, and a friend of Francis David, the founder of the Unitarian Church. He had to flee from the native country, Greece. My speech is not meant to present his role and importance. I intend to speak only about the catechesis, focusing on the main character called Telephus, the Indian. The Catechesis Christiana is, of course, a fiction, but this fact does not make it less valuable. The character of the colloquy are the following: Samuel, a Jewish merchant, two young men from Kolozsvár named Peter and Paul, a Lutheran, a Roman Catholic, and a Calvinist citizen as the representative of the churches from Transylvania. Of course, Telephus was the last person. They all turned to the wise preacher to the town, who can be identified as Francis David, to give them answers to their questions and doubts concerning religion. The wisest priest of the city proves to be a very well-prepared clergyman, and he goes on explaining to them the dogmatics of the Unitarianism for 12 long days. This is a catechism presented in the form of a dialogue, and the author, Jacobus Palaiologos, most probably performed it together with his students in a dramatized form on the stage too. Telephus, the Indian, is portrayed as an uncorrupted, naive sage of pagan whose simple moral and natural rationalism are presented against the dark superstition and irrationalism of the European Catholicism. He is the best described character, and from the beginning to the end, preserve his unsophisticated way of being. He tells us that the new world, America, is inhabited by plowmen who know nothing of wars, that his people adore the rising sun, not because the sun itself is God, but because he loves most he who sent us the sun. Palaiologos taught that by following the urge of nature, people are able to understand the most intricate theological and philosophical truth. The rules of coexistence, most of them present in the Bible too, in the form of moral law, also belong to the realm of truth, which can be realized by the human intelligence. We could think that Palaiologos considered Telephus the embodiment of the religio naturalis. But in fact, the writer was convicted that although the religion of nature can lead the human soul up to the height of the certain degree of development, in order to rise even higher, we need the revelation. Palaiologos speaks about this in his work entitled De Tribus Gentibus, about the three nations, written in 1572. In this work, he said that God has three nations who have correct conceptions about justifications: the Jews, who are the descendants of Abraham; the Christians coming from the pagan, that is the Roman Catholics, the Orthodox, the Armenian, and the Protestants. And finally, he mentions the Muslims, calling them Turci Christians, Turkish Christians. According to him, there are two kinds of religious belief: the fides narrationis, faith in historical narration, and the fides promissionis, faith in the divine promises. According to Palaiologos, that kind of belief make true Christians. Later I will speak again about this thinker who cherished such courageous universal ideas. Now I would like to continue with the indirect connection between the Unitarians from Transylvania and the English liberal thinkers. The work entitled De Falsa et Vera, in Latin, of course, two books of the false and true knowledge of the one God, the Father and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, which may have been printed in 1570, proves the existence of such connection. Those who know the history of Unitarianism somewhat better than average people will also know that this is the most important, and it is the same time the most mysterious anthology of entitled Trinitarianism from Central Eastern Europe. It can also be considered the manifesto of the Polish and Hungarian anti-Trinitarianism, and it appeared for the first time in 1568 during the debates at Gyulafehérvár between the Calvinists and the Unitarians prior to the decree from Torda, Edict of Torda, the famous Edict of Torda. There is evidence that Francis David and his comrade planned to a second edition in 1570s, dedicated it not only to King John Sigismund of Hungary, but also to Elizabeth I, Queen of England. In the dedication written in Latin, Queen Elizabeth is described as a pious defender and supporter of the resurgent church. The editors presume that the Queen was aware of the existence of certain books written by some of their opponents, like Beza, Bullinger, Simler, and others. They stated that the attitude of this man can only increase the arrogance of the followers of the Pope, and therefore submitted their statement to the approval of Her Majesty. Francis David, the main ideologist of the Transylvanian Unitarianism, must have known about the activity of Giacomo Acantius, Sebastiano Castellio, Lelius Socini, Bernardino Ochino, and others, and he surely read their books too. All of those authors, except for Castellio, were members of the Strangers' Church in London, and they undoubtedly were the sympathizer of Elizabeth I. That is why the editors of the Falsa et Vera decide to dedicate the second edition of the book to the Queen of England. Paulologus wrote another work entitled, in Latin, Adversus Pii V, Proscriptionem Elisabethae Regniae Angliae, against Pius V, the proclamation of Elizabeth's Kingdom of England, which has never been printed, and in it he also presented Elizabeth England as the country of tolerance. In his letter of dedication addressed to the Queen, Paulologus emphasized that he had always sympathized the English, therefore he thought it was his duty to defend the Queen against the excommunication of Pius V. In the 16th century, it was no secret that the Transylvanian Unitarians cherished warm feeling for the Queen Elizabeth. An adept of this cult was Budai Parnesius István, or Steve in English, the first Hungarian who traveled to America. Budai Parnesius was born at Buda, capital of Hungary, and we don't really know anything about his youth. Some of his modern bibliographers agree that at about 1570, he was studying at the Unitarian school at Kolozsvár, and let us not forget that just about that time, Jacobus Paulologus was teaching there. Taking into consideration the sympathy of Paulologus for Elizabeth I, we can easily imagine that he had shared these feelings with his students too. Like this, we can accept the idea that it was this guidance that led Budai Parnasius Steve toward England and the country of the uncorrupted savage, the New World. If we have a really good imagination, we can also risk the statement that he might have read the Catechesis Christiana from Paleologus. Some influence of his can be traced in his own work entitled The Navigation, in which he presented the New World, America, as an alternative to Europe, which was by the time suffering from the Turks and from the Pope too. He expressed the idea that uncorrupted inhabitants of the new continent who were living a natural life without any official law and who had never experienced the bitter taste of any kind of tyranny could ensure that beginning of a new golden age. But this land could be reached only by the sons of those countries who were independent from the Turks and from the Pope. Such a country was England, ruled by Elizabeth I. Budai Parnasius arrived to Oxford in 1581. There he became acquainted with Richard Hakluyt, the geographer, with Sir Humphrey Gilbert, and many other scientists and explorers. Admiral Humphrey Gilbert was one of the favorites of Queen Elizabeth, and he was granted the right to found a colony in the New World. The Hungarian Budai Parnasius joined the expedition led by Humphrey Gilbert, so he was present when the island of Newfoundland was found on August 3, 1583. He was the chronicle of the expedition and described with poetical beauty and enthusiasm their voyage and all what they saw. Unfortunately, he died a premature death and therefore could not give a detailed transcription of his notes. The fleet continued by voyage on 20 August and was caught in a storm somewhere around the island Sebla, island of sand, nearby New Scotland. So on August 29, the ship named Delight went down together with its crew. About 100 sailors drowned, Parnasius one of them. Anyway, he was the first poet to write a poem about the New World. In this presentation, in present speech, I don't intend to speak about the beginning of our connection with the English in the 7th and the 18th century, nor shall I describe in a detailed way the nature of those connection in the 19th century. I only want to mention that we have had a regular connection since 1821, when the Secretary of the British and Foreign Unitarian Association, William Jones Fox, sent a letter to our consistory in Kolozsvár. The letter was written in Latin, and its title was Unitariorum in Anglia, Fidei Historiae et Status Presentis Brevis Expositio. Organized connection with America in the 19th-20th century. They started to build up a relationship with the American Unitarians in 18, Unitarians in 1831. It is generally known that Alexander Farkas Bölöni was the first Unitarian from Transylvania who made a voyage in the United States in 1831. He wrote a very popular book about his voyage entitled Travel in North America. In this book, he presents the young American democracy as the realization of the ideas of the French Revolution and compares all that he sees there with the degenerated society life from his own country, where there are very restricted possibilities for any real development. In the book, he can also find a Hungarian translation of the Declaration of the Independence. It is almost natural that the book soon became a kind of bestseller in Hungary, but due to its liberal bourgeois ideas, its publication was just quickly banned by the authorities. During his voyage, Alexander Farkas meets some Unitarians too, and after coming home he made a report for the consistory about all he had experienced in America. He became acquainted with the Reverend Henry Ware Jr., secretary of the American Unitarian Association, who started to send letters to his brethren in Kolozsvár. Our connection with American radically changed in 1868 when Charles Dahl, a missionary clergyman from India, while going from Calcutta to the United States, visited Kolozsvár. He remained there for 2 weeks, and during that time, he became acquainted with Transylvanian Unitarianism by going from parish to parish in the company of Professor Gergely Bencédi. In the festival hall of the high school in Kolozsvár, he gave a lecture about India and about Unitarianism in America, which was followed by great interest by the Unitarians from Kolozsvár. The leaders of our church seized the opportunity to send a letter to the American Unitarian Association, which was considered so important that was published in its entire length in the monthly journal. The letter was written on May 20, 1868, and in it, the Transylvania expressed their great regret that in spite of all their effort so far, they had failed to get in touch with the American Unitarian Association. But at the same time, they said that they hope this would change in the future. Having heard that the Unitarianism from Hungary were about to celebrate the 300th anniversary of the existence of their church, the executive community had requested Reverend Dr. Frederick Henry Hage, then in Europe, to represent the American Unitarian Association on the occasion. They even sent a note written in Hungarian in which they greeted their sister church. In the same letter, they offered to bear the expenses of the translation of Dr. Channing's book into Hungarian, German, and Hebrew. Let me give a short quotation from this letter. We don't know whether there is any way in which we can be service to you or can participate in your labors, and yet we venture to make one suggestion. We know how much your literature has done for us, The writings of the Fratres Poloni still have place in our libraries among most valuable of our theological treatises. And we shall be glad if we can make some return for what we have received by sending to you the thoughts of our best writers. It has occurred to us that it may be some service if we should translate into various languages of Europe the writings of Dr. Channing and other authors, and we would respectfully ask you whatever it is likely that such a work would contribute at all to the success of our cause in your country, and whatever you could circulated such writings if we should send them to you. The letter was signed by Charles Lewis, the secretary of the American Unitarian Association. The offer was readily accepted in Kolozsvár. For those who want to know something about the connection between us and the American Unitarians, the main source might be those 315 letters which we sent and received between 1881-1912. The part of the original letters written in English is to be found in the Hungarian Unitarian Church archives under my direction. There is more elaborated collections of the letters in Hungarian translation, the title being The Album of Hungarian, English, and American Correspondence between 1821-1922, or more than 100 years long correspondence. The best chronicle of our connections with England and America is the 4-volume album, which has come down to us in handwriting, and it's really ought to be published. The size of the volume is 42 by 26 centimeters and contain about 900 pages. In the 1870s, Channing finally could be read in Hungarian in 6 volumes. Not only was the American Unitarian Association willing to support Hungarian Unitarianism, but private persons were too. I feel it my duty to mention the name of a lady called Anne Richmond from Providence, Rhode Island. In her letter written on March 3, 1875, she offered $5,000 US dollar, creating a working place for a teacher in the high school in Kolozsvár. The sum was placed in a bank in the USA, and $500 was sent every year as the salary of the teacher as long as the money lasted. Of course, not only the secretaries of the American Unitarian Association were written letters to us, but other people too. Unfortunately, we don't possess the original copy of the most valuable letter, that one written by William Howard Taft, the 27th President of America. The letter was written in February 16, 1909, and it contained a polite answer to Bishop Joseph Ferenc as congratulating him on the occasion of his election. But this is not the end of the history of the connection between the Hungarian and American Unitarians. On the contrary, those connections become even more elaborated after 1882, when John Kovács, the above-mentioned professor of theology from Kolozsvár and the founder of the English Conversation Club in Kolozsvár, in the same city, visited the United States. The aim of his half-year-long voyage was to collect funds for modernize our education. After Kovács, the next visitor in America was George Boros, the former bishop of the Unitarian Church. In May 1900, in Boston, Massachusetts, on the occasion of the celebrating of 75th anniversary of the American Unitarian Association, representative of many like-minded Unitarian, liberal, Christian, and non-Christian churches of the world were invited to participate. On 5 and 6 June 1899, the American Unitarian Association sent a letter to the Hungarian Unitarian Church, specifically to Bishop Joseph Ferenc, invited the leaders of the church to the festivity. They also announced that during the above-mentioned occasion, there would simultaneously be an international conference held. Samuel Atkinson Elliot, the secretary of the American Unitarian Association, who later became its president, sent a further letter to the Bishop Joseph Ferenc on 5th of January 1900. Among other things, he said that he had no intention to presume to design Hungarian representatives to the conference, but his friends wishes Miklós Józan, Unitarian minister from Budapest, to join the bishop on this journey to America. Taking into the consideration his age and his state of health, the bishop suggested to the Unitarian Church consistory that George Boros, professor at that time of theology, go to America in his stead. At the same time, he explained that it would be impossible for Minister Miklós Józan to leave his ministerial work in Budapest for 2 or 3 months, as there were nobody to replace him. As a result, only George Boros was designed by the consistory to be representative of the church and to take part in the conference. Boros left Kolozsvár on the 2nd of May 1900 to be present at that very important gathering where the IARF, International Association for Religious Freedom, was established. On the basis of Boros' paper and at the Hungarian archives, we can undoubtedly state that the foundation of the IARF is both the idea of Elliot Atkinson Samuel, the secretary of the AUA, who later became president, and the George Boros. After the meeting, George Boros remained for many weeks in America, and during that time, he was awarded title of Doctor Honoris Causa at Harvard University in recognition of his many activities in the church and for his connection with the Unitarians from America. After the First World War and the Treaty of Trianon, Louis Craig Cornish led a delegation which tried to find lawful solution for the Hungarian churches which had now fallen into the minority status, as I mentioned on my at the beginning of my speech. The Partner Church Council was founded, and our American Unitarian siblings helped us surviving the losses of war. We met our true friends in difficulty. After the war, many Hungarian students were studying at American universities, the best of them probably being Francis Balázs. From Francis Balázs was named the scholarship, Francis Balázs Scholarship at Starting School for the Ministry. Francis Balázs was one of the most important. But let's let's not forget about John György, who as far as the beginning of the 1900s, went to study in America and received a doctoral degree from the Harvard University. After coming home, he became a professor of biblical science, but after a time, he gave up it for personal and church political reasons. He immigrated and he probably died in South America, in Brazil. It may be interesting to mention that some of the books of the rare book collection now cherished at the Pride of Starting School for the Ministry came to Dr. Wilbur through John György. After the Second World War, the relationship between Unitarians in Transylvania and American was interrupted for a long time as the communist power in Romania did not allow cooperation with the capitalist states. Relations were limited to a few formal letters. After the regime change in 1989, relations were renewed. The partner church relationship were established, and many young Unitarian ministers get scholarship for studying at the Starking School for the Ministry and the Midway Lombard Theological School in Chicago. But the discussion of these is the subject of another presentation. May God bless. Thank you for your attention.